I didn't originally record my my Lithionics 2 battery installation, nor the 3 battery installation. But since I'm taking my whole system apart because I want to put in remote battery switches for the inverter switches and a new small solar controller and a Victron Smart BMS for extra DC to DC charging, I'm now pulling my whole system apart, and so I'll be able to show you how you go about installing a 3 battery system. This is the Lithionics battery in my step battery box, and it's not going to be touched as part of my reconfiguration and reinstallation of the second and third Lithionics battery in the inverter bay. Here is a diagram of everything that I'm connecting to my Victron Lynx Power In dual 12-volt bus bar system, so you can discern between the wiring that I'll be showing you and the diagram and see what, get a better understanding of what's being changed. Okay, I've deconstructed my inverter bay where I have my multiple Lithionics batteries installed, and this is my bus bar wiring for all my batteries and my inverters. But anyway, I am installing a separate 200 watt solar panel. So I've taken this all apart. I'm doing a number of things in my inverter bay battery compartment. But anyway, so I want to show you what I'm doing with the solar. I've drilled a hole to go up into the coach so I can bring my solar wires down and hook them to my bus bar. And those wires, that hole is right there in the floor. And I'm going to be installing this little small 75 volt, maximum 75 volts and 15 amps of output. I'm going to be putting it right here inside of my, this is where my fire extinguisher hole is, right at the step. So I'm going to install it right inside there and run my 2 sets of wires, the one for the solar panels coming up through the hole and the one hooking to the battery or hooking to my positive bus bar going back down. And I'll be using 30 amp circuit breakers, so I'll come back in and show you how I'm doing all that. Okay, I got the solar controller installed inside my TV cabinet, and I've got the wires pulled up from my bus bar system, my battery bus bar system. So now I'm going to connect them, and I'm going to be using a ferrule for the on the end that goes into the solar controller, and I'm going to use a 1/2 inch 10 gauge connector to put it on my circuit breakers. I'm using a circuit breaker as basically as an on and off switch to turn the solar panel power off, and then I'll be using a second circuit breaker to actually protect the wires for the power coming out of the solar controller. So let me get on with hooking all that up, and I'll be back. Okay, I actually had to remove the solar controller to get my ferrules in because the terminals on this Victron small solar controller, they're rectangular and not square. So when I do my crimping, when I do my 10 gauge, and 10 gauge is like the max these are going to accept. So when I use my 10 gauge ferrule, the crimper makes it square. So I had to take a pair of needle nose pliers and squeeze it on one side to make it more of a rectangular shape so I could get it slid into the terminals on this. So right now I've made my battery connection, my plus and minus battery connections, and now I'm going to pull my solar wires, my 10 gauge solar wires from the roof down here to this so I can hook it up with the 30 amp circuit breaker to use as a switch to turn the solar panel power off and on. So this will be a good setup for a 200 watt solar panel that I'll be putting on the roof. It's a new technology. It's made by BougeRV. It's called a CIGS panel. And it actually puts out a good amount of power, even if it's shaded. So I wanted to install a separate controller so I could test it and see how that's all, see how that compares to my 400 watts of just standard. In my case, I have Renogy glass panels. So anyway, so I'll get on with my installation. Okay, so now I've got my solar controller installed. I have my two 30 amp circuit breakers. I use 10 gauge wire because the solar panels only put out about 8 amps incoming, and then the outgoing is about 12.5 amps, 13 amps, so 10 gauge is good for 30 amps, so that's perfect. So this is done, and the next thing I need to do is go up and pull my wires down for the solar panels. Okay, now I've hooked up my solar controller to my positive and negative bus bars on my Victron Lynx Power In bus bar system. So that connection is done. I am replacing my inverter battery switches, my manual Blue Sea battery switches, with a Blue Sea remote battery switch. And this is an electrical switch that's hooked. You hook the cables that you want for this switch to connect and disconnect, and then you can run this long wire back and have a nice little switch like this. It's lighted on and off, and it has this nice protective cover so you don't mistakenly press it one way or the other when you're using it. And here's the wiring diagram basically that I created for this Blue Sea remote battery switch, part number 7700. So it's basically 5 wires. So and they recommend 16 gauge. So I bought a 6-stranded 16 gauge multiple cable. I couldn't find 5, so I bought 6, and I just cut the one that I'm not going to use back, so I don't have to worry about getting mixed up. And then here's the wires coming from the Blue Sea battery switch. So now I just need to make the splices to connect the long 5-wire cable to the short 5-wire pigtail that comes out of the Blue Sea battery switch. So what I like to do is I'm going to use solder, little solder connectors, and then I'm going to cover that with a piece of heat shrink, and then ultimately I have a larger piece of heat shrink that'll be sliding all over top of all the spliced wires. So let me get my heat gun and I'll come back. Now when you are doing this, you want to see the ring of solder. There's a metal ring of solder right there. And when you see that melt, that's when you know you've made a good connection. So let's, I've never used my heat gun for this before, so let's see how it works. Then I like to add another piece of heat shrink over where you've heated the solder to melt, because sometimes, you know, you have to heat it so hot to get that little piece of solder to melt that it melts what is supposed to be your heat shrink. So it doesn't really, you know, solidly cover the wire, and I don't want the connections laying on top of each other and maybe, you know, heating up. So I just put another layer of heat shrink just to make sure I have a good sealed connection. Okay, so let's try another one. Here you can see I've got the strands overlapped on each other, and I'm using a little torch this time. And you'll see this when it melts. You'll see it spread. There it went. It might be hard to see in the video, but you see it's just like liquid. All right, so I've got all my connections made, and now I can slide my heat shrink over the top of all those wires and heat shrink it down, and I'll have a nice finished looking cable. I'll come back and show you. Okay, so here's my finished wiring bundle, nice and neat. And now I'm going to be installing the Blue C switch on this wall because I want it to operate this inverter. So I will get on with that and show you what I'm doing. Okay, so I've got my Blue C switch installed. I've got my wire run, and it's coming out at the top, and as you can see, it's running over to where it's going to go up into the floor, so I can put the switches right by the door. So my Blue C switch is installed, and now I just have to do the wiring. Okay, I also hooked up my ignition control on my Kisae 3000 watt inverter. Inside this little hole that says digital input is a male spade terminal. So I just crimped a female spade connector onto this blue wire that I'm using for my ignition control wire. And I'm running it along the top of my compartment down to this end and up through the hole that I have to go into my TV cabinet, so I can connect it to the house battery switch, and it will automatically turn on the Kisae when I turn on the battery switch, turn on the control power anyway. And then this is my control power connector, ignition control power connector for my Xantrex DC to DC charge, or not DC, 3000 watt inverter. So I will be splicing it into this wire so I can connect it to the 3000 to the Xantrex 3000 watt inverter, and then I will have complete ignition control, meaning when I turn on my battery switch, my house battery switch at the step, the inverter control power, both inverter control powers will be turned on, and basically the units will be turned on automatically as far as the control power goes. Okay, so now I've got my Blue C switch installed on my positive cable connection between the Kisae 3000 watt inverter, and over here it's gonna hook into my positive bus bar, and I'm using a Class T fuse. I installed this a few years ago when Class T fuses were widely available, so I used that back in the day, and so I've continued to use it. Okay, I have completely finished reconfiguring how I wanted my Victron Lynx Power In dual distribution 12-volt bus bar to be organized. I've added this 100 amp circuit breaker and wired it up there along with my new solar cable. But this 4-gauge wire that's running to that circuit breaker over there in the corner, that is going to be my second alternator charging DC to DC charger. So I'll be running another wire. Well, I have the other wire actually connected to it, and it's running out over there to the outside, so I'll be pulling that to the passenger seat for my second DC to DC charger. So then, as far as everything else goes, there's my dual bus. I also have a Victron Shunt, which is really very hard to see. It's right there. And I have my 3 battery cables for my 3 Lithionics 320 batteries connected to it. Up here, you can't see the connections, but I actually have 2 of the 3 Lithionics battery cables connected to that one terminal. Then I have that red cable right there that says battery 1. That is that's running into my battery box under the step for the second, or for the first Lithionics batteries. Then the other 2 Lithionics batteries are here in the compartment. And then everything else is pretty much the same as when I originally wired it. I have down here, I have a Class T fuse for my Kisae inverter, and I have that wired there with one of the battery cables on that positive bus bar. And then I have my second Class T fuse running up here to my Blue C automatic battery remote battery switch. So that will turn on my first Xantrex inverter, and then as I said, this Class T fuse runs up there. That runs my Kisae inverter, and it comes down here, runs across down the compartment to this side, where I have my second Blue C remote battery switch and my Kisae DC to DC, or my Kisae 3000 watt inverter. And I've wired an ignition control wire to it, It has a remote. Then I have my ignition control that I'm going to add to this wire when I install my Xantrex. So I'll have both the inverters on an ignition control feature. So they both turn on automatically when I turn on the house battery switch. So there we have it. Got everything wired. It really looks like a big puzzle. But now I can start putting the inverter and the 2 batteries back in. So I'll come back and show you what that looks like. Again, here's my wiring diagram for all that I did. Okay, I've got my cover back on. It's looking better already. It's looking neater. Okay, I've got my 3000 watt inverter back in. And now I can start hooking everything up. All right, I've got everything hooked up. You always want to make sure that you get your wires lined into your Xantrex inverter terminals by neutral, bare wire ground, and load. So that's white, bare wire, black for each of the 3 terminals. It's very important that you wire it according to that order, because that's what the directions say you're supposed to do. Now, I also have my battery cables connected. You always want to make sure that you have your pluses and minuses correct. So you can see this is red for positive, so that's right. And the top one, I actually wrote on it inverter negative, so those are correct. All right, so I can put the cover back on. And I'm all done with that. Tighten this up. Okay, we got it all buttoned up. All right, now down here, you always want to make sure this little silver button is popped out. See how you can either push it in or pop it out. You need to leave it popped out if you want to use the Bluetooth remote with it. Okay, I spliced my ignition control connector into the blue wire, and it runs up into the hole in the roof where I'm going to get its power. So this is done. Okay, I have everything hooked up. I've got my new Blue C remote switch hooked to this 3000 watt Kisae DC to DC charger. I have its ignition control wire connected. I've got the Xantrex 3000 watt inverter connected. My cover back on my Victron Lynx Power In 12 volt bus bar distribution system. I've got all my battery cables, all the inverter AC in and out connections. I've also got the ignition control feature connected. So basically everything is connected now. The last thing I need to do is install 2 of my Lithionics batteries, 2 of my 3 Lithionics batteries here in this compartment. But first I've got to replace the compartment separation wall that I made from my, from initially when I installed all of this. So I've got to put that back, and then I will be ready to install the batteries. And there are my 4 battery cables that go to each battery. And so I'll get on with putting in the wall and getting everything set up to put the batteries in and come back. All right, I've got my separation wall in. Everything's nice and tidy. It looks like it's packed in there, which it is, but none of it impedes the Xantrex inverter from getting plenty of ventilation. So it's all good. So that's done. The wall's back on. My cables for my batteries are through their own little holes and ready for me to hook up the batteries. So I'll get on with that. I forgot to show you, I made this nice platform out of pieces of PVC board, and then I had some old paneling material. So I just made these two platforms, and I'm going to use these nice things to hold the battery in place on them, and then we'll be done. So this battery is in, and then I just have to put the second one in. So I'll get on with that. Okay, I got my two batteries in, and I always tape a cap or something over the power button because I don't want to accidentally turn it on while I'm trying to get it in place, because that could be disastrous if you did that and your positive battery terminal touched something negative, or touched the ground. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to install a 300 amp Blue C. It's called an MRBF terminal fuse, or fuse block terminal. Anyway, this is a fuse, and this is a special holder for the fuse that actually goes to the terminal, hooks onto the terminal of a battery. So there's the hole that you put on your battery terminal, and then you connect your battery cable to this end. So I'm going to be installing both of these on the positive terminals, and you always connect to your positive terminals first and then do your negative terminals last. So I've actually switched the batteries around just because of the way I had to do the cables to the Victron Lynx 12 volt distribution, that blue box there. So I've got the positive for this battery up front, and then I've got the positive for the second battery back there in the corner. So I will get on with attaching these and come back and show you what it looks like. Okay, I do want to point out how you put these terminal fuses on your battery cable. So it has its own power, metal power piece on the top. So you set your lug right on the top of that fuse, that round metal part on the top of that fuse, and then you put the flat washer, the lock washer, and the nut that comes with the terminal fuse, and tighten it down. Now you don't want to gorilla tighten it because you don't want to break this plastic casing for this fuse. So basically, I just get it down real tight, and then I give it one last little quarter turn, kind of a little, kind of a grunt turn right at the very end. So I'll get on with tightening that down. Okay, so it's very tight to get in here to put these on, but I've got the negative cable hooked on, and then I also have my Blue C 300 amp terminal fuse attached. So I'm done with connecting this battery. Okay, so for my third battery connection, I'm able to put the MRB fuse on first, put this little cap on to protect it. And you always want to make sure this red part is pushed back as far as possible, because you don't want that interfering with the bolt you're putting in to hold this on the battery terminal, nor anything to do with the actual base of the terminal. You don't want this to, keep it, basically you don't want this to be between anything around your battery terminal as you're tightening this. So now I'm just going to put it back here. And put my bolt in and tighten it down. Okay, I got both my batteries in. I got my little nice Lithionics on-off remote switches so I can turn off the battery from just out here. I don't have to worry about sticking my hand up and trying to find it on top of the case. And then inside, as you can see, I've got I've got my battery cable hooked up. I've got the remote switch hook up. I've got the bundle of wires that they give you, that Lithionics gives you, so you can, you know, put the switch basically wherever you want. I've got my MRBF terminal fuse covered up, so there's no risk of it somehow vibrating and touching metal. There's how I put my switch in. Simple little thing that I VHB taped to the top of the compartment. And then over here, I don't know if you can see it, but my MRBF switch is back here. And I cut the cable terminal cover that Lithionics gives you so it would fit around the MRBF terminal fuse, and I have that all nice. There's no risk of that touching anything metal because it is sitting off the back. And then I have my remote switch connected there. I have my negative terminal connected there with the cover, and then of course the battery switch. So it's all hooked up now. Alright, so basically I'm all done with my dual inverter upgrades, adding my Blue Sea remote battery switches to my inverters, putting my 2 of 3 Lithionics batteries back in, putting my 3000 watt Xantrex and all its associated wiring, well, all the wiring, because I've got the batteries, the inverters, I've got my battery under my step, everything wired in parallel to this Victron Lynx Power In 12 volt dual bus distribution center. So I am basically all done. Now I have put some foam back in the back just to add to keep the batteries up, make sure they're gonna that there's no issues and that they'll stay securely in their places. It's just extra insurance. I like to do redundant things. So there you have it. I am done with the hardware phase. Now I have to go in my TV cabinet and do all the wiring for the remote inverter battery switches and the ignition control for the inverters, and finish all that up. So I'll come back. Okay, so here I am in my step area where I have pulled my blue wire for my inverter ignition control and the 5-stranded wire that cable I'll be using to connect my Blue Sea remote battery switch. Now I had already, when I initially installed my first Xantrex inverter and one Lithionics lithium battery, I installed a Blue Sea switch for remote battery switch for that inverter. But then I didn't do it when I installed my Kisae. I just thought it would be easier, you know, not to do all the wiring, which it was, but I really would like something convenient, more convenient now that I'm redoing everything. So I'm going to put my second switch, you know, right next, well, in this area. I've got a 2-switch holder that I'll be cutting a hole out and clipping my 2 switches into, and then I'll mark them inverter 1 and inverter 2. So I'm basically going to be doing all my connections to the house battery switch battery side terminal. Well, no, not battery side. It doesn't have to be the battery side. It'll be the switched side of the house battery switch. So that way my inverter control power and my inverter switches will be active whenever I turn on the house battery switch. Okay, I have to install this dual cover switch box, basically, so I can snap my Blue Sea switches into it. So I marked out a place there. I'm going to use a little hacksaw and cut that out to install that little switch housing. I'll be back. Okay, that little cover fit in very well, and once I put my fire extinguisher back, it's a nice tight fit. So I'll get on with that. Here is the wiring diagram I used for making all my connections to the Blue Sea switch. Okay, this looks complicated, but it's not really. I'm using fuse holders for each connection. I have one fuse holder going for the inverter ignition control. So that's a fuse line. And then I have another fuse holder that is, oh, here it is. That is the power supply. You need two powered lines for the switch. There's 5 terminals on this switch. 2 powered lines. One goes for the light and one goes for the actual switch power. And then I put a piggyback terminal so I can piggyback the grounds together. And then I just put, you know, regular female spade connectors, so I'll have the 5 wires that go on these spades, and the ground from the 2 switches will be ground together. And so now I just need to put my switches in and plug all the wires up, and I'll have my switches back in. So I'll do that and come back. Okay, using my wiring diagram, I numbered the terminals just like the diagram, and then I numbered my wires to correspond with the connections so each one of these is numbered. Where is my, oh, there's my number. So each one of those is numbered, as is the switch. So now I can plug them all up and push my switch in. Okay, now I've got everything plugged up, and it's just simply, okay, and simply get the little thing lined up in the opening, and you just push it in. You hear it snap, and now it's locked in. Okay, so now both of my Blue Sea switches are connected, are installed, and now I'm gonna label them inverter 1, inverter 2. I might even make a little bit legend here to tell what is running from each inverter. So now the only thing that I have left to do is attach the power cable inside to this battery switch terminal right there, and then I'll have power whenever my house battery switch is turned on. So I'll get that connected. I'll get all my wires tidied up, and I'll be done. All right, so I've tidied up my wiring, and you can see how everything's connected from this side. So, and I've got it hooked up down here to the battery switch. So we are done with the inverter ignition control wiring and the Blue Sea remote battery switch wiring. So now I have remote switches to disconnect the inverter, both inverters from the batteries when I want to turn it off, and then reconnect it, turn it on, turn the inverters on anytime, you know, I'm using it and I want to when I'm using my batteries. So, a nice addition. I really like these little slidey covers because they protect whichever way you have your switches on, so you don't accidentally, say, turn it off when you know, you were manipulating the battery switch down here, or turn it on by accident. I always keep the ons covered because I definitely don't want to accidentally turn my connect my inverters to my batteries unless I know that's, you know, I'm ready to do that. Okay, so I'm done with this project. One last tip for those folks that have a fire extinguisher like I do right inside their step. I added little magnets to the corners of the fire extinguisher case, and then I added corresponding magnets to where the screws were before, where it was installed. And then all you have to do to put it in and out is just have it hit those magnets. Can't do it with one hand. Anyway, there. And your fire extinguisher is very easy to take off and on.